Welcome back to the fourth section of our module on using data to tell a story. When we think about those grant applications, in our last section we focused on foundation grants. So what would that leave for our fourth and final section of this module? That's right, we're on to government grants. Let's be honest, there's a huge elephant in the room right here behind me. Is it appropriate? Is it possible to tell stories in government grants? You're right. I was reading your mind, wasn't I? It's one of the biggest questions that comes up if we talk about storytelling in grants. But if we go back to the definition of storytelling that I shared with you in our last section when we talked about foundation grants, the reality is that storytelling in grants is truly about everything from the beginning to the end, from that initial cover letter or form that goes on top of the application through the last of our attachments and all the narrative in between. Those are all part of our storytelling elements that are contributing to the grant maker's overall understanding of our organization and our work. So that's our broadest definition. So with that, it makes sense that the answer is yes, storytelling in government grants is appropriate and possible. But what if we're talking about actual stories? Remember our four types: the client, staff, donor, and community stories. Is it appropriate to use those types of stories within our government grants? The answer is still, it could be appropriate and it could be possible. But there are slightly different constraints that we might face when it comes to government grants that we might not have thought about or have access to in the same way that we talked about in foundation grants. So we've got our whole application as our story, because every application element in a government grant could contribute to our final score. This is less about emotional hook and whether or not a grant maker at a foundation level will advocate for you, but usually this is about, did you score at the top of the pile or not? So our entire application gives us the potential to continue adding to our score depending on their rubric. Where we can start to customize that four-story idea, how could we fit in any of those story types into a government grant? Our biggest concern is not about that emotional hook like we did in the initial letter of inquiry in the last section, but rather to ensure that our reviewers who are going to score our government application, that they have as much information as possible, as deep an understanding as possible, that they have found all the elements that contribute to our overall score so that we're at the top of the pile. So one of the things that you might consider is a persona. Now, a persona is a way that we generalize and describe the type of individuals that we might serve. This is different than sharing a single testimonial, but could be used within our text to describe generally the type of individuals that we would serve in a slightly different way than providing only cited data in formal text. So slightly different approach, a little bit unique, but can still draw to mind, can make the visual connection for a reviewer. They can start to imagine, what might someone look like, or what might their experience be? How might they find the organization? What might be some of the issues that they would face in accessing services or supports or programs? So as you can see on your screen, when we're thinking about client personas, some of the information that gets included within a client persona can be their basic demographic information. That might be based on what you learned through your needs assessment. We talked about that in our first module in this online grant training. What did we learn in the needs assessment process? That might influence the demographic information we include in our client persona. We might create a persona that has a combination of histories from different stories and individuals that we've heard and worked with over a period of time. And also based on what we've learned through those we've served to date, we might take some different barriers that we plan to address through the program design, we might include some of those barriers within the persona description. What we're trying to do is help our reviewers have a sense of who are the type of individuals that we anticipate serving. As we think about our grant makers then, and maybe we've ended up with 3 or 4 different personas that describe the types of individuals that we might serve. Depending on the priorities, the goal, the mission of the grant making agency, or the specific program we're applying to, we might choose to highlight one persona over another within the body of our text. Now, where is it that we might place said client persona? Where does that fit within the large narrative that we often have to write for government grants? This is something that is often either in the significance section, in the target population, in our needs section. It's usually pretty early on, because what we're doing is using the persona to set the stage. We're going to back it up with our formally cited data, but the client persona, the combined, uniquely massaged, different demographic, barrier-related information that we've learned from our needs assessment and our interactions and interviews with our current and recent clients and individuals served, that persona is making the data more personable, more accessible, maybe easier to digest and then imagine for those that will benefit from the proposed project or program. So it is taking the very formal data and making it likely easier to digest for the reviewers. That is the purpose of trying the client persona within a government grant. Is it always appropriate? Can't use the word always when it comes to grants. It always depends. Now, what would it depend on in this scenario? How would we decide if a client persona is appropriate for us to use or not? I think the most important thing for you to look at are the scoring criteria. Look at the scoring rubric for the program that you're writing for. If you are confident that you have done everything in your power to earn the top score for the section that you're in, and you still have a little bit of space left, if there's a limit on a specific section, you might consider, would a persona add to the reviewer's understanding? Would it possibly do more to help with my score or not? If the answer is no, leave it out. That's not a big deal. If the answer is yes, certainly let's add it. Well, what if you don't have a length limit for the section where the persona would usually go? What if instead all you have is a length limit for the entire application? What I would recommend in that scenario is to conduct a mock review, if possible, of sorts of the application. How do we think we will score overall against the guidelines? And then step back and say, would we enhance our score if we added the client persona? And is there space in the application overall? Or is there another section that we think is going to get the absolute top score, could be cut down a little bit and still achieve the top score, so we could add a client persona earlier on and boost that section's score? It's a bit of a balancing act, just like that balancing image I had in the foundation section about storytelling. You only want to add a client persona if it adds to, if it enhances your current narrative, if it gives you the potential to get an even higher score. That should be the filter that you use when making a choice about using a client persona. Now, as we come to the end of our module about storytelling within the grant applications, please don't forget that in addition to reaching out to me via email with questions, there's lots of other ways that you can connect with me and continue to receive grant-seeking resources and support. But email is definitely probably the best, easiest, fastest way for you to get any of your questions answered. You can reach out to me at Diane@dhleonardconsulting.com. And as we close down this particular module, well, don't forget, there's 5 total modules in order for you to get your certificate of completion, and that these modules are brought to you through a number of generous funders. And that is how you are able to participate in this online grant training. Please be sure to reach out with any questions, and I can't wait to present you with more information and best practices in the other modules.